Hi, everyone. Welcome to Getting Personal with Compt. I am Lauren Schneider, the head of communications at Compt, and this is a show that is all about diving into the way we work, trying to create a better employee experience, but not just a better employee experience, a better human experience. Today, I have with me Ryan Johansen. He is the founder of a program called Stress Less and Get More Done. Ryan, this is your moment. Tell me who you are, a little bit about yourself, about the program you founded.
Hey, Lauren, really appreciate you having me on. My name's Ryan Johansen. I'm based in the Boston area. And like you said, I run a program called Stress Less and Get More Done. And I've been in the tech space for a number of years. And I didn't get into this field because I thought it would be super interesting or super fun or anything like that. It was from very much my own, somewhat dark experience with things like burnout in the workplace. And about 5 years ago now, I had been promoted to a management job at a startup. I felt like I had arrived. Everything was going well. I worked really hard for that job. So felt like I was on the top of a mountain every day. And then quickly realized that when you become a manager, you start to have everyone else come to you with problems and your workload explodes. And you go from being amazing at your job to being brand new at your job, which translates to not that great at your job. So definitely an experience where I was hesitant to tell other people I was having a difficult time with it. And then on top of just an everyday quotas to hit, stress, pressure, more with less, all that stuff that was going on, I didn't take care of myself. I ended up working even more because that's all I knew how to do. That was the only way. Put more hours in, you'll get more out of it. And that started to break down for me because I could work 168 hours and I couldn't keep up with the workload. So what that led me to is feeling helpless, feeling like a failure, and where I'm eventually not taking care of myself. I end up withdrawing from social activities. I start having panic attacks, and it's really wreaking havoc on my brain and my body. Then one day, I hoped it would all go away, and I walked into work one day, and it was like this volcano went off of a panic attack that I've never quite felt before, and I hope I never feel like that again. But it was so bad that I just had to grab my boss and tell him, listen, like I've been struggling for a while and I got to get out of here and get some help or do something because I feel like I'm just going to explode as a person right now. And from there, I called my therapist, who I hadn't been talking to for a matter of months because I've been so busy with work. And he said, here's what you can do. You might want to put yourself into a hospital because that's a good place if you're feeling like that. And it sounds a little extreme, but it's a safe spot for you. So without any further ado, there's no playbook for this stuff, but that's what I did. And it felt like the lowest point of my life. I felt like life was over. I was a failure and I would never get any better. Typically, you don't end up in those situations on a winning streak, but what I ended up doing was I told them I wanted to get out of there as soon as it kept me in there. And I ended up being there for 3 days because it was a holiday weekend and they wouldn't let you out over the weekend. And I decided, why don't I make the best of this? And it led me to an interesting thing where I noticed a poster in there of people like Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill who dealt with some of these things too. And I had no idea that they did. And so they're incredibly successful people. So I was like, okay, maybe I can figure this out. Maybe I have a shot because I'm somewhat of a competitive guy. I like to I've always believed in my ability to figure it out. So what I do is I get out of there. I start reading books. Start taking courses. I start really leaning into like taking care of myself, getting professional help because all I cared about was getting better, just getting through the day. But the other thing too is I didn't take much. I didn't have the luxury of taking months off of work or not working at all. I had to go back to that job, and I liked that job. I worked really hard for that job. So the other part I needed to figure out was how can I still do my work? So the other thing I started leaning into and researching is how do I get more done in less time? How do I run my day effectively? So I spent a ton of time at the library, and aside from taking care of myself, an amazing thing happened is as I leaned into things like this before, I started feeling better. I started being able to handle more pressured situations. I wasn't feeling out of control every single day. And I started to be more productive because I'm focusing on the right things. I'm not, burning the candle on both ends. And I'm actually following a lot of proven research because a lot of the things we do are so kind of backward and wrong, but it's because everyone else does it. So we follow along and everyone does the same actions and gets the same results. So that's a long spin, but essentially what I decided was, hey, I'm feeling so much better. And if someone had taught this stuff to me, it could have avoided one of the worst moments of my life. So that's when I decided, why don't I try and teach other people this? And that led into me helping people on my own company, which led into doing a webinar with, I thought a few people might show up and over 500 attended. So it seems like it's an interesting topic. And as of a few weeks ago, I've been at this for a few years now, but I'm now full time helping organizations actually make a difference with burnout by teaching people the right skills to run their day effectively and think about work in a more healthy way.
Yeah, you just sharing that I know resonates with me and likely so many other people because there are so many people, not even just this time of
Oh,
year,
yeah.
but like throughout the year, post COVID, even pre COVID, like just all of a career can be just this hyper productivity and you work you live to work, you don't work to live, if that makes sense. Where you're just like burning the candle
Mhm.
at both ends and then
Yeah.
you burn out and so many people like you hit that wall and you can't find I don't like the encouragement or something to do what you did and turn it around and do the research so that you're like, wait, how can I turn this into something that is productive or something that will benefit me? So I wanted to ask you, like, because we see
Yeah.
this almost like glorification of like hyper productivity in the workplace, and based on your personal experience and everything that you've learned through all of this, like, are what are the most common pitfalls of that kind of mindset? I mean, obviously there's burnout and things like that, but like, how can you recognize those signs or those red flags long before you hit that breaking point because you want to be able to like anticipate this or at least course correct, right?
So it's a complex issue, and there's a lot of different factors at play, and I'll try and spin through a few of them. The first one that comes to mind is that we're applying the same work methodology that we did in when we worked in factories, when time equals output. And we haven't moved off from that, even though
Mhm.
work has drastically changed. I think you have leaders that just for a lack of a better understanding, or this is how it's always been done, look to, they can only take that limited view of time equals results, when clearly you can have people that can get 10x the work done in half the time. Sometimes you have more productive people. So a really good book that I've read about this that really changed my, at least the way I thought about this, and there's a lot of things you can apply to, is The Effective Executive. And that's by Peter Drucker. He's known as one of the best management thinkers of all time. And he talks about
Mm.
being efficient versus effective. And efficient is doing a lot of things, effective is doing the right things. So that's one thing that maybe we can dive into it a little bit later. But on the other part, so like number one, the way we work is just horrendously broken. And then also the other part of, you have to be, or we're expected either by, and it's usually just ourselves that think, because no one's ever made this agreement, or this is something that just kind of happened, that we should be available,
Yeah.
plugged into the system at all times. Because that's something where even throughout your workday, multitasking is really difficult for your brain. And it's something that, to a lack of a better term, it's a necessary evil. But with one of the things is, if you're trying to do a lot of different things at once, it actually takes you way longer to do it. So that's something that I practice, and I teach other folks, that like, even just blocking off 1 hour and just shutting off the communication stream of email, Slack, everything else that you have to do, you can take a breath, and then you can actually get what you need to get done. And when you do that, you tend to feel a lot better. And then that gives you more motivation to get through the day. So like, simple changes like that make a difference. And then I think the last thing is that, obviously the stigma still exists. And I talk about this for a living, but it's still something I get fairly uncomfortable with. And I think it's more of a larger societal problem that I'm not going to fix. And, the only reason I do this is because other people doing this help me, and I'm trying to pay it forward. And selfishly, it also helps me, think of things in a more clear way, and like take care of myself, and practice what I preach. But most of us are in these comparison bubbles where we compare what we feel like on the
Yeah.
inside to how other people represent on the outside. and we're afraid to share things vulnerably, and probably for good reason. It might not feel comfortable, but when I realized and started sharing about this stuff, I realized that it is so common. 1 in 4 people deal with something like this, and if it's not you, it's other people. So to sum up those three big ones that I see is we're still running work like we did in factories in the 1800s. Number two, we're always plugged in 24/7, and that's actually diminishing our capability to get good work done. And then number three is just some of the societal issues, which I don't think I'm going to fix, but I think we're getting there. And this happened to me before COVID, and nobody really talked about this stuff. So it selfishly for me, like just it made me a little bit more comfortable now that people talk about this stuff.
Totally understand that. I want to double click on something you had mentioned, effective versus efficient. Tell me more about
Yeah,
that.
so that kind of it's a huge point because and I think this is leading to burnout, and I think it's to companies not getting very good results, and you're trying to do everything. There's no lens of what's important. So employees, leaders, everyone on down the line struggles with where should I focus my time, because there's so many different opportunities to chase. And what happens because of that is you end up doing all these little things in different directions, and you're kind of doing a few different things, but you're not really completing much. Whereas if you shift the focus and you really focus on those 1 to 3 important things, then you feel like you've accomplished something and you're making progress. And I always use the analogy in
Right.
courses that it's kind of like an engineer, if they only build half of 20 features, they have no features, and they probably don't feel good about themselves, and they have nothing to show for it. So and like
Right.
focus is hard, but it's something that is incredibly important.
So, talk to me about, I know this is so hard to sum up. I try to get to like the crux of like actionable advice for viewers. Like, what are your top strategies? But really, there's so much involved. So how do you, are there even one, two, three things you could recommend to like managers, employees, people who are trying to foster a healthier work-life balance, not just for themselves, but for their teams as well, or for their coworkers? Like, is there a, if we can't do all of the things, is there like one or two that is actually attainable?
Yeah, so I'll start this out with, I always like using the caveat of treat it like a buffet.
Hmm.
Take what you like, take everything, try everything, see what works, and if you don't like it, leave it on the plate. If you do like it, get doubles, because things like burnout, any challenge like that, it's highly individual. So it can, like, a lot of well-meaning people will tell other people, "Oh, you need to take an ice bath for 25 minutes," and you're trying to help someone, but you end up either making them upset, or maybe they've tried that before, so you're frustrating them. So I'll like take anything I say with a grain of salt. But I'll say a few things that I typically recommend is one I alluded to a little bit earlier is I think this is a big one for productivity, and also you tend to feel a lot better. Is I waited until the first hour of the day to check email. So what I would do is the night before, I also had the shutdown routine because a lot of us work from home and work would bleed into
Yeah.
life. So what I would do at the end of my day, I would try and call it at a certain time. And I'm human; it doesn't always happen like that. But I'd write out at the end of the day, what do I have left, and then I'd circle my top three. And what that did was it gave me a little bit of space so I could shut work off. And the brain hates those open loops where you're thinking about that meeting you had when you're watching TV or something, and that just dominates space in your brain. So, like, number one, that gives you a little bit of removal from work environmentally. The second benefit of that is instead of hopping on email, where I used to open it up as soon as I opened my eyes, where I would get bad news, or I would get distracted, or I would just, be miserable before I even got out of bed. So instead, by doing those top 1 to 3 things, I felt accomplished. I actually made progress on things I had to do. And it made me feel a little bit more confident going into the day. They're like, okay, I made a difference. The rest of the day can go to hell, and oftentimes it might, but I at least had
Yeah.
something to show for it. And my to do list wasn't just incrementally growing. And that's another thing where, like, you feel it's another burnout thing where, like, the more helpless you feel and out of control you feel, it can be really difficult. Number two that I would say is a huge difference. Actually, I should put this as like number one above anything else is like get professional help. I always
Mm-hmm.
like no shame in the game. It's something that can make a huge difference. And I see, there's a lot of stuff out there, but like you want a professional that can help you out with that. I'm big on self-study, do other things like that too. But like you definitely need that number one thing because you're not an expert and like you got to figure that stuff out and like have some guidance along the way. And then, so the other thing that I'd say is really helpful is just writing what you have to do down or writing like your difficult thoughts out because like that's the whole point of that is you're bringing objectivity to a situation, whether it's our workload or a difficult thing that you're going through in life. Simply by using objectivity, whether by writing down what's going on or coming up, there's all sorts of frameworks you can
Yeah.
use, but that's been very powerful for me to like test are my thoughts really that realistic, because your brain can distort things in a matter of different ways. So that's something a good therapist that can help you with, but I think there's a lot of good things you can do there. And then as far as like increasing like the human part of work, which I think is very important, is just like give people a break, and like have some empathy for other people. And that's another thing where like that always starts with working on yourself, because you can't expect
Yeah.
the whole world to completely go to you. So one of the big things that I run through my programs and I like had to spend a ton of time on is just learning how to communicate better, because a lot of conflicts are just communication problems. And that's a thing where conflict can end up taking a lot of productivity away. It can make your life way harder than it has to be, and learning to how to handle that effectively. So like not shying away from those difficult conversations, because a good one that I heard is conflict is like sitting at a table full of trash and both people know it's there. You get uncomfortable and just gets worse over time. So if you think of like some of those challenging situations, it's something that you can learn how to handle that, and it's a skill that you can build. But if you have two options, either you address the conflict and you feel better, or you don't do it, you feel a little bit better, and then you feel way worse over time. So those would be like the top three: is don't start your day on email and like focus on, at least have a focused hour to yourself a day. Number two, get professional help and start writing out things that might either your workload or things that bother you. And then number three is just work on your communication skills.
I wanted to bring this full circle though, because at the beginning we talked about the impact that all of this had on you in your career and the breaking point that you reached, and then the steps that you immediately took to make a change in your life. I want to ask, how did, once you employed all of those strategies, how did that change your relationship with work and the people that you worked with, those around you?
I'm sure people are like me a lot more. One of my best win stories ever would be the first person that ever reported to me. Like that was the first person I ever managed, and she came up to me like she had been promoted in the role, and like came up to me maybe like a year after I went through this, because she was working for me when it happened to me. So I was just stressed out and miserable all the time, and I tried not to take it out on other people, but just working for someone that's a stressed mess can be difficult on you too. And she was like, I don't know what you've done, but like you just seem like a new person, and I'm so happy for you that you're doing so well. So like, and the good thing is like with all of this stuff, it's not just like work has gotten better, but it's like my personal life's a lot better too. It's like I'm more patient. I can handle things like that. I think a big thing for me and like why I decided to go full time with this is like helping other people. Is another thing where like takes me out of my own problems and makes me think of this stuff too. But I'd say one thing that has just made a huge difference, and I encourage other people to think about, is it's not the greatest place to end up, and like feeling like this is really difficult. But the thing to remember is that I wasn't like better overnight. It took me a long time. There's a ton of ups and downs, and it's still something that I have to work on. But like if you are in a situation like this where you feel awful and you're helpless and you're kind of at the end of the rope, whether work or whatever, like just be patient with yourself and know that like starting really small can have a big difference over time. And it's just being patient,
Yeah.
being kind to yourself too, which like that took me a long time to be cool with too. But just knowing that you're a human and you can. One thing I always love to say is like I'll show people a bunch of stuff, but I always end things with, okay, would you rather have 1% of $1 million or 0%? So like any progress you make is a step in the right direction. So that like whole I need to be perfect thing is something that like I've tried to abandon and just focus on like, doing my best, even though I like kind of hold a high standard. But I'd say
Yeah.
for a lot of different reasons. And another thing that happened too is, you end up, your life almost ends and it's going to change the way you think about work. So that was a very dramatic way. And I only got better because I was just in so much pain that my life depended on it. So I'd say kind of the last thing that I did was I remember in a lot of different points in my career, I had got that promotion I wanted. I had gotten that raise I wanted. The first big check I ever got, I felt good about it for 10 minutes and then then I felt like I was on to the next thing. So
Yeah.
another thing that's been really big for me is trying to get clear on what I actually care about and what's important to me, not just that, the external scoreboard, because it's known as the hedonic treadmill where we continually put our happiness on this. I'll be happy when, and we continually charge against that story and it doesn't work. So the quick shift that I've made, which is really important, is I still have goals. I still have ambitions, but I'm very clear about like being very thankful for what I have, because I literally ended up in a very terrible scenario. And I thank God that I'm not in that scenario anymore. And just looking back at where you came from is a very helpful way to like reorient your focus and know what's important.
That's true. I think so often, especially on the show, we talk about practicing empathy in the workplace.
Mhm.
And usually it's in the context of towards others, and we forget to do the same for ourselves.
Yeah. And
So,
with that, it's if you a good test if you're ever being too hard on yourself is ask if you'd be friends with someone who talked to you the way you did. And that was always helpful for me.
yeah, I have to remind myself of things like that.
Yeah.
So I get where you're coming from. Ryan, I wanted to thank you so much for your time today. This was a fantastic conversation and one that I think we could dive just even deeper on because there's so many different levels to this and stuff to unpack. But I know that your story will resonate with somebody watching. So if they need your advice, if they need your guidance, if they maybe just want to ask you a couple of questions, where can they learn more and reach out?
Yeah, I would say either follow me on LinkedIn or my website, ryanjohansen.live. Either of those are a good place to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for your time today. And anyone else who's watching, if you would like to be a guest on Getting Personal with Compt, send me an email, lauren@compt.io.